United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You have an agenda in front of you, folks. Anyone care to make a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any other further comment? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Dan, you want to talk a little bit about the election of officers here for the, or is it something we should?
It's up to EDA's discretion. Typically, we've done this when we have a full EDA membership, is to make sure that everybody, if they get nominated, is okay with the nomination.
Yep.
We do at some point need to do this if we want to table this until we have a full body of the EDA, that is okay. if you want.
Personally, that's what I'd like to see done. You know, because there's an old joke flying around, if you want to become chairman, miss one meeting.
Yeah.
Let's not do that to anyone.
And that's fair. There's no, this is not, an immediate need, so we table, it's totally fine.
I'd make a motion that we table item number 5, the election of officers.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes of the last meeting? Or the meeting of January 10th, I should say.
Yeah, reviewed them. I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the regular meeting on January 10th.
I'll second. Any further comment? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. And then Dan, could you tell us a little bit about this is item number 7, about the Downtown Highway 61 Commercial Incentive Program application?
Yep, members of the EDA, as you recall, we still have the active downtown incentive program where businesses can apply for incentive abatements of up to $5,000 if they have qualifying expenses or exterior improvements in excess of $40,000. We have received an application for that program. The application is for 432 North Shore Drive, which is Coffeesmith in downtown Forest Lake. The application is for exterior improvements and stormwater landscaping improvements that have been made to the property. As I stated, the current criteria require the applicant to submit costs in excess of $40,000 in order to qualify for the full $5,000. The applicant did submit costs in excess of $40,000 for the stormwater and exterior improvements to the building. Those costs included the installation of a parking lot, rain garden, and a sidewalk to the building. I've reviewed what was submitted and confirmed that the costs are, in excess of the $40,000. So therefore, staff is recommending approval of the incentive for 432 North Shore Drive in the amount of $5,000. And just a little bit about this program, I have also talked to a couple of other businesses that are potentially looking at making applications this year. So we are getting some interest in the program, which is good to note. But this is the first application for 22 that we have. And if you recall, the EDA is currently budgeted for up to $30,000 worth of incentive for 22. So we have plenty of incentive. So therefore, staff is recommending approval of this application for $5,000. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the EDA has.
Well, they certainly have done their work there. There's no their due diligence, no question about that. They spent a lot of money in that place.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a good way to spend the money on our side. Comment.
So is that a vote thing?
I would.
Yeah, so we do need a motion from the EDA to approve.
I make a motion that we accept this grant request.
Second.
Okay, any further comments or questions? All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Well deserved.
Yes.
This is exactly what we have that money for, so. Number 8 is business subsidy policy and introduction. Dan, you can help us with that?
Yep.
too?
1 second. Oh, you want to get me? Members of the EDA, if you recall, as part of our work plan for 22, we looked at updating our business subsidy policy, reviewing the subsidy policy, and making some updates to that policy. So what we have tonight is sort of I'm going to call it the business subsidy policy 101, is sort of the foundational work in terms of So kind of the intent of tonight's discussion isn't so much to actually go through and really start crafting, or really start drafting the language. This is more just to provide the EDA with some foundational knowledge on what is a business subsidy, how to use them, et cetera. That foundation will then come into play when we start working on the actual language changes and making those policy adjustments a little bit later this quarter. Just so the EDA is aware that we do currently have a city policy. So we do currently have a city business subsidy policy. A copy of that is included in the packet that was released. That policy was approved back in 2012. So it's, as of this June, it'll be 10 years old. So it is due for revision, which is one of the reasons why we have this on the EDA's work plan for 22. One unique thing that we do have here in the city is that we both have an EDA and a council policy, which is really kind of a unique anomaly in terms of how subsidy policies work. Most cities just have one. And as we go through this review process, we are going to recommend combining that in just a one policy instead of having to maintain two separate policies, combine those into one policy moving forward. But we do have a current policy, so we are, in compliance with state statute that way. For tonight's discussion, kind of want to start out with, what is a business subsidy, and then move into why would we want to have a policy? What's the intent of the policy? A little bit of overview on when to use and not use a business subsidy. Looking at some of the tools that are available as a subsidy program. So what is the end result? What do these look like as the project comes forward? And then the last portion of this is more kind of a little bit time for discussion at the end of what type of development or what type of goals we want to include in our policy as we start going through that revision. At any point during this presentation, if you have a question, you have a comment, feel free just to interrupt me. And you don't need to save your questions till the end. So feel free to interrupt me as I go through this and get your questions asked. So to start out with, taking a look at what is a subsidy. Business subsidy is actually defined by state statute. So there's a statute behind this, and it's defined as a state or local government agency grant, a contribution of personal property, real property, infrastructure, or principal amount of a loan at rates below those commercially available to the recipient. In addition, a business subsidy is any reduction or deferral of any tax or any fee, any guarantee of any payment under a loan, lease, or other obligation, or any preferential use of government facilities given to a business in an amount greater than $150,000. And that number is key, so we have to be in excess of $150,000. So what we just did with Coffeesmith 5,000, that's well under that threshold. We do not actually have to follow the policy because it's under that threshold. So you're looking at the business subsidy policy is for those larger incentive packages. A couple of things to keep in mind. Developers will always ask for subsidies. That is typically one of the first questions anybody when they come to the city will always ask is, what type of incentive programs do you have? That doesn't mean that they all receive them, and many projects still happen without local subsidies. So I just say that you always will hear a developer coming in as they say, what do you have available? That's typically one of the first questions that's asked, and usually asked a couple of times throughout the process. So they always do typically ask, but like I said, many projects still happen without local subsidies as part of that development package. Why would we want to have a policy? Why do we want to go through this exercise right now of crafting a policy? Well, first and foremost is that state law does require an approved subsidy policy for subsidies given that are greater than $150,000. So if we want to offer development subsidies that total $150,000 or more, we by law have to have a policy on the books. Policies also help to set minimum standards for projects to meet. Basically what that allows us to do is sort of eliminate some of the case-by-case, review basis for different projects and set some of the guideposts so that they have to meet certain standards to be considered for subsidy. Policies also have to go through a public hearing prior to being adopted. So members of the public can come in and are able to offer comments on the subsidy policy prior to being adopted. Since we are using public funds, in private development, the public does have an opportunity to come in as part of that approval process and allow for their comments to be heard by the board approving the policy. One other thing to be considerate here when we talk about the policy is when you really get into the weeds on business subsidies, there are certain projects that come forward that may look and feel like they would fall under the business subsidy policy. However, given some of the details of that particular development, they may actually work outside of the policy. So what I mean by that is that a project could still ask for public money, but given some of the details that are in there, some of the dynamics of that particular project, they may still qualify for public funds, but can operate outside of this public subsidy policy. That it's a little bit, it's hard for me to get my head around that a little bit as well, but there's some loopholes in there. There's some caveats that you can take a project, still get public funds, but they don't have to follow the guidelines in this business subsidy policy. But for the most part, most projects that come forward will fall into this business subsidy policy. So when would you want to use a subsidy? One of the reasons why you want to use it is to accomplish city development and redevelopment goals. If you look at our 2040 comp plan, we have certain land uses that we want to accomplish, certain developments that we want to try to encourage here in the city. These subsidies are one way for us to help accomplish those development and redevelopment goals. Another reason would be the project comes in and says, I can't go unless they get some type of incentive. So their financials don't pencil out. They need some type of gap to need to be filled. And that project does demonstrate, a need for an incentive. I also put on here city is last in. And what I mean by that is the project has gone through the other levels of government as part of their review process. So they've gone through that. There's any federal incentives that they can tap into, any state incentives that they can tap into prior to coming to the city and asking for city incentive. Sometimes there are better incentive packages offered through deed, for example, that they can qualify for than what the city can offer. So we want to make sure that we would go through all of those first. And if at the end of all of that review and analysis, there still is a need for a city subsidy, it'd be a good opportunity then for us to use city subsidy to close that gap. What are some reasons you would not want to use a subsidy? First and foremost, it creates a market advantage for the project. If the market, for a particular item is incredibly robust and hot, and there's no problem attracting that type of development, you don't really want to offer a subsidy for that. So for example, in the metro right now, multifamily housing market rate is taking care of itself. There really isn't a need to offer subsidies for market rate multifamily. It is a very hot item in terms of how the metropolitan development community is. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do a subsidy for that because that would create a market advantage for that particular project. If after reviewing the project, that project falls outside of the scope of the policy. So for example, project comes in, offers X number of jobs. They're bringing jobs to the city, but they're low paying jobs. And our policy is set where we want to bring in, they're not at that dollar per hour threshold. You probably wouldn't want to offer a subsidy for that because even though they're bringing employment, they're not meeting our goals, our redevelopment or our economic employment goals that are included in our overall policy for this. Also, if the city's first in, if they come to us and say, we're only asking the city for help, it's probably, again, you want to make sure it goes through that review process of are there other levels of government that they can go through for incentive before we consider putting subsidy in. And if the project does not establish the need for subsidy, if after looking at the pro forma and seeing how it pencils out, if it doesn't truly establish the need for a subsidy, it's not recommended to offer one. These are not tools that basically line the pockets of developers. These are tools to help encourage development for projects that have a demonstrated need that subsidy can help fill that gap. Also remember that not all projects will qualify. There's going to be a lot of projects that come in that they're not all going to qualify based on their merits. So there are going to be a few that come in that just are going to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. They're going to pencil out, and those would not be ones that would be recommended for subsidy use. What are some of the tools? Now, going through this, we will have a more in-depth conversation about these tools at a later date. I know there was, again, some questions on the EDA, just sort of on the mechanics of how these work. I just wanted to be familiar with some of the terms in terms of We go through the subsidy, what does that look like? What is the end result, or what does the developer get? One of them is tax increments financing or TIF financing. There's tax abatements. We can forgive or reduce the amount of property tax owed. Reduce city fees is another option that's on the table. There's some other loan programs and some grant programs that are available, but we don't have those in place right now. So those, I didn't include those on this list. But these would be the three ones that would probably more likely than not come forward here within the city. And again, like I said, we will have a more in-depth discussion on this. We'll do kind of the Subsidy Tool 101 at a later meeting. For project types, what type of projects will qualify for the subsidy? And this is the part of the presentation where when I get through these next two slides, there'll be an opportunity for EDA feedback on these project types. Now, this is our current subsidy language that we have in our approved policy from 2012, which basically states, as a matter of adopted policy, the city will consider using a business assistance tool to help assist private development only in those circumstances in which the proposed private project shows a demonstrated financing gap and meets one or more of the goals presented in the city's strategic plan and is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. The city's primary development priority is to encourage high-value commercial development, included but not limited to manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, office and retail uses, single-family residential and multifamily residential housing proposals may be considered for assistance on a case-by-case basis. In all instances, the terms and conditions of any business assistance are to be decided at the discretion of the city council. When I look at this language that's currently in our policy, my opinion of this is extremely broad. This basically, it says any project that comes in, you could shoehorn into this criteria. So the goal when you're trying to establish your goal criteria is to make it general enough where you're not completely shutting the door on everything, but make it narrow enough where you are still accomplishing your goals. This to me is this to me is a little bit too general. I'd like to see that made a little bit more specific. So for comparison, I also pulled up Cottage Grove's goals and objectives language that they have. Their policy is included in your packet as well. So they have 9 goals that they're looking to accomplish. So for them to offer incentive, the project needs to meet 2 of these goals. So first would be to remove blight and or encourage redevelopment in designated redevelopment/development areas per the goals and visions established by the City Council and the EDA. Expand and diversify the local economy and tax base. Encourage additional subsidized private development in the area, either directly or through secondary spinoff development. What they mean by that is, let's say take Headwaters as a tech development, for example. You could put the tech center in there, and once that is there, that can encourage other type of development to happen in that surrounding area. That's what that spinoff development is. It's the secondary and tertiary development that happens after the first project is sited. They also are looking to offset increased costs for redevelopment over and above costs that a developer would incur in normal urban and suburban development, as determined as part of the but-for analysis. Facilitate development process and promote development on sites that could not be developed without public financing assistance. Increase the number and diversity of quality jobs and or retain local jobs at high wages. Provide the highest and best desired use for the property. Improve or add public infrastructure such as roads, utility extensions, stormwater ponding, et cetera. And establish business interests that add to the diversity of the city's offering. What you see in Cottage Grove's language as compared to the cities of Forest Lake is Cottage Grove, while they're still fairly general or more specific, they have actually defined, here's what we're trying to accomplish with our subsidy program. Our current language right now basically says you bring a project in that's a development or redevelopment, you basically meet that initial criteria for review. I personally like to see a language moved more to a Cottage Grove side, just because it does allow for a little bit more goal setting on the city side to say, what are we trying to accomplish with our incentive programs, with our subsidy programs? So with that, just kind of want to open up the conversation, just have some initial high-level conversation with the EDA of what type of objectives is the EDA looking to fulfill through a subsidy program here when the city, as we go through this review process. Again, this is just the first conversation. We will refine these with better language. We don't need to wordsmith them tonight. Just kind of looking just for some feedback on those initial objectives from the EDA standpoint.
Thanks, Dan. A lot to think about. Simply because we do want to kind of narrow it down and get it more defined for sure. Go ahead.
I've got a question that kind of, it's background to this. What happens if you give incentives to a company that comes into town, builds something very large, broke or they couldn't make it? What happens? Is there a course for clawback on those funds if they just move out of state? Or what happens on that? Just out of curiosity.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Large, what generally happens when you do a business subsidy agreement as part of the public hearing, you usually have a development agreement that's attached to that. And usually these are pay-as-you-go type incentives. And so if they don't perform, they don't get to receive the incentives. And so, for example, if a company comes and builds a building here and stays in that building for a year or two, they can certainly receive the benefits while they're in there. But if they no longer occupy that space, then those benefits are no longer available.
So it's not a one-time check kind of thing and done and deal. And it looks like there's plenty of hoops you got to jump through too to get there.
Correct.
Starting with the Fed and state, county.
Yep. Usually it's tied to job creation and to the dollar amount of the investment that goes into the property. So they have to meet those thresholds to be able to receive the benefits going forward. If they don't hit the number of jobs or don't build the building that you've agreed to in your business subsidy agreement, they don't get the incentives.
Thank you.
And I noticed that looks like Cottage Grove's funding options are a little bit broader than just the three that are a part of our group. Are we looking at expanding that to include things like loans and bonds?
At this point, I think primarily keeping it with the three that are there, that's what we're really financed for. I know Cottage Grove, their budget's a little bit larger than ours, and I want to make sure that we're, growing that in tandem with, as our budget expands, in the future. I don't want to put something on the table that we can't finance, and put an incentive out there that we don't have funding for.
I agree. I think we're a little small for loans, for having a loan program to businesses. County actually does a better job, or some of those other agencies do. So I'm not sure we're looking at that yet. Maybe as we get, like you said, Cottage Grove size, that's something we could grow into. But right now, we don't have the money or the support staff to doing a loan process at all.
Yeah.
Put it in, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just wondering, how often are these policies reviewed? Is it 10 years pretty standard?
No, 10 years is fairly long.
It's a pretty long time.
Okay. The reason I ask is I had ancillary experience with another community where a private entertainment industry actually had city-backed bonds to build their building. And so, I assume they must have had that bond option in their policy, unless it didn't quite hit the 150,000 mark. But
I don't know it depends on what the conditions of the bond and what the building, if the city retained ownership or transferred ownership later. Again, like Chris says, pay as you go if you do TIF, or depending how long the bond is for, do you keep them in place? So I don't think we're ready as well to go through bonding at this point, but again, it's another tool I think we could grow into. But I don't think we're ready for that either. We don't do a lot of bonding. Bonding gets expensive. Property tax go up faster than you can keep up. So I'd like to stay away from that for a while. But we take your point. I think these policies need to be reviewed a little bit more often than every 10 years. There's no doubt about that. It should become a regular part of the agenda every 3 to 5 years, probably.
And to that point, I think most cadences I've seen for review are between 2 and 4 years, 2 years on the earliest. And that's not to say they get fully rewritten. It could just be if you get to the point where all of a sudden we're at a spot where we could add a loan program or bonding program. That's an easy change to those programs. I think this review, since it's been so long, since our first crack at having a business subsidy policy, there's going to be more language changes, more policy changes there. But I think moving forward, it'll be more of a housekeeping effort. This is still good that we're still meeting our development goals. because those can change too. I mean, think about what Forest Lake was 10 years ago. I mean, a lot has happened in 10 years here in the city, and a lot will happen in the next 10 years here. So I think reviewing those goals more frequently will make sure that this document stays current.
Dan, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, this is because I'm really ignorant on this. I really- So excuse the dumb questions, but if you've got a company that wants to come in, they say they're going to hire 75 employees. They're looking for incentives. How do you determine the dollar amount the city can afford to give them? Do you do it based on a percentage of what they're bringing to the community? Is it a set dollar amount per employee, or how do you do that?
I think that starts with what they think their assistance is necessary. So you have a company with 75 jobs come in and say, we need $3.5 million. Well, show us why you need $3.5 million, and then decide, can we afford it? What's really the ask? What's really can we afford, as far as whether it's a tax increment, which be a little easier because it's future financing basically, or if it's a direct subsidy or something like that. It's really, I don't know if we have a formula. I think it really depends on what the development is and what the ask is and what the return on investment is, as far as jobs or tax base or anything like that. One's going to be different.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Chris, please.
Mr. Chair, I might just suggest that the policies that you're going to be looking to develop or update are really the basics, the minimum that would be, a minimum acceptable application to be able to consider for any type of incentive. It doesn't mean that you'll apply any incentive to any business that comes in. It's generally, and I would always encourage this to be at the sole discretion of the council. How much do you feel comfortable allowing this business to have? Are they providing, a lot of really high wage paying jobs, or is it something that, isn't really going to move the needle in terms of the employment benefits or the tax benefits for the community? So really, it's a discretion of the council, and this is just allowing you to set the minimum basic requirements to get them to the door, and then you can always negotiate later.
Yeah, so at least you're looking at an individual basis, and which is really the way to do it. So Dan, what are you suggesting as far as getting our noses into this thing? And
I think, what I see is going to this is for the city to really establish what we want to have happen. I think historically with incentives, we've sort of always had the project, we've been led by the project, and that's not, I'm not faulting what happened in the past. But I think our projects have led us, our goals are kind of secondary and the developers are first, and I think by us saying, what do we want to have happen, is sort of that starting point of saying, here's what we want to have. So in terms of like going back to cottage growth criteria, for example, to come in and even be considered for a subsidy, the project has to meet 2 of these. So they come in and say, okay, a project comes forward, hypothetical project comes in and says, okay, yes, it expands and diversifies the local economy and tax base. That box is checked. It's going to establish a business interest that adds to the diversity of city offerings. So it diversifies the tax base, because we all know a diverse economy is more resilient, it's more recession proof. There's, you want diversity in your economy. So if it checks those 2 boxes, then you can get to the next level of conversation where you start looking at what type of incentive, what's the gap, what do we need? But to really start out, this policy language is sort of that, if you use the kind of a go no-go term, it's like project comes in, meets none of these, it's not going to be considered. So I think we need to get our policy to start out with saying, here's what our language looks like. And then from there, you can dive down into what areas of the town we want to prioritize. So if somebody comes in with a project that meets 2 of these, and you have 2 competing projects, you may say, we want to prioritize downtown. So that project takes, because we have limited resources. So this is not something that we just have unlimited resources here. We have to start to prioritize our resources as well. So if we prioritize, say, downtown, that project would take precedence over one that's, say, happening here. So it starts to help establish from a staff perspective that when a developer comes in and says, here's my project, here's my location, here's what I'm going to bring to the table, you can say with some level of assurance, yes, that sort of meets the pre-flooding that we've discussed. Now, obviously, these are going to rise and fall on the merits and the details that are in there, and making sure council's in agreement with that. But it does make those initial conversations with developers more productive, because we know the direction that the EDA and the council want to go with the development. So starting out from a staff and an EDA perspective would be to really kind of work on, language similar to what Cottage Grove has as the example of what are our objectives? What do we want to have happen? Because, how you incentivize that, it's going to change based on where we want to go as a city.
Yeah, I recall our consultant of our downtown committee talking about throw everything you can at the downtown.
So I was writing down here and I thought, perfect timing.
And that's key. I mean, especially as you look at, downtown with the redevelopment standpoint, it's a great time for us to be doing this because we'll be shovel ready from a policy standpoint. When a development project does come in, we can say, here's our new criteria. Does it meet this criteria? Yes, it's in a priority. It says here, rule number one, does it meet the goals and visions established by the council and the EDA? For the downtown redevelopment, based on our planning, it probably would. So it starts to give some level of assurance to developers as they come in to know that, yes, their project, has, if they can demonstrate that need, they still have to go through the laundry list of the rest of that review process. Is not something where they're going to come in and be like, I'm going to do a development, where's my incentive? They still have to demonstrate the need for that incentive, but it does give us makes those conversations, those meetings more productive from a staff perspective.
So I would assume that when we fill this EDA position that we're still working on filling, this would be a great tool for that person to have to go out to attract what we want.
Correct. So from how this is handled in the past, from a personal experience, how when a developer before when I've looked back at how we've done business subsidies, given our current language, which is pretty broad, pretty general, and I look at the project types that we've done, when a developer comes in and asks, would you have an incentive package? It's always been, like I said, our projects have led our incentives. So it's sort of like, well, we've done them for this, we've done them for that, we've done them from all these different sectors. So I'm sort of like, bring what you're bringing in, because we've historically have done pretty much a little bit of everything, a little bit of a potpourri. But having language like this, that new person will know, if it meets these boxes, yes, keep that conversation going. If not, your project is still welcome here. We just wouldn't qualify for a local incentive. And like I said, just because we can't offer the incentive does not mean that project's not going to land here in Forest Lake. They help bring projects in, but it's not the only reason why a project would ever come here.
It's really not the reason you want them here, really. That's what it boils down to.
Well, so I could have some thoughts on that.
Judy's next.
How many projects over the years do you think we've lost because we straight out just say, no, we have no incentives to offer you?
In my conversations, zero. The conversations I've had, nobody has basically said, when I told them we don't have an incentive for that particular project, they haven't walked away. It's because of other reasons. The property didn't work out. They got their financing went some other way, but it has not been, we've not lost a project that I'm aware of based on having not been able to offer an incentive.
So I've always just wanted Forest Lake to be a business-friendly city. Does having a real policy in place does that make us more attractive for people to possibly come here?
In my opinion, it does, because two things, if I go back to my MBA training, the one that they always say time is money. And if I'm a developer coming in and I know I can get my policy through and I have a set of guidelines to hit, my staff can then work on getting that project to meet these criteria versus if they're coming in and it's sort of open and I don't quite know where they're going to be, there's some uncertainty there, which either is going to cost me time and money. If there's certainty, it shows that we're serious, and I think that brings us more legitimacy in the development market.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, if the EDA is involved in writing the policy with the council, can we have some kind of informational session prior to that, drilling down on what these incentives are so we can make informed decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. That we actually look at, what I'm looking at doing is doing joint workshops with EDA and council, because obviously both bodies are working hand in hand on these incentives, kind of going through the incentive 101, kind of similar to this, and really start to hash out what they look like, maybe even potentially tabletopping a couple of just examples, see what they look like. Because I think it's easier to look at hypothetical examples of what it might look like versus what it might, the concern I have is like, if you have a project that, if you're doing this development of a policy with a project that's on the table, that project always bleeds over to the policy development. It's always better to do these sort of as a hypothetical. But with hypotheticals, I think you sort of need some sort of concrete thing to get your hands around, something tangible to take a look at and say, here's what it would look like. So I think, yes, to your question, there would be an opportunity for another workshop that we actually go through and say, here's what it would look like. But that being said, a lot of these things are going to rise or fall or be kind of changed based on, as Pat said, project need. What's that gap? What do we have to offer? How much can, what's that look like? Those numbers are going to be very fluid based on what the project, when they come forward.
And you mentioned the EDA and council each have their own policy currently. Are they mirrored or are they different?
They're very, very similar. I mean, I haven't gone through them and fine-tooth combed, word for word. I think they are the same policy. They just says one is EDA is responsible, one is council is responsible. My recommendation, it all goes back to council, make them the responsible authority, for the policy. And EDA serves more of an advisory role as these projects come forward and reviews and offers input on them at that point. And I have no idea why we have two. I just was looking through the incentive policies and I see that we have two policies there and I'm like, okay, this is not a normal situation for us to have two, so let's combine those into one. And
Do they both have the same date? I mean, roughly, or same year, or?
Roughly the same time period.
Okay.
And when I go back through the records, these, I believe, were done about the same time Team Vantage came in. So I think they were sort of hand in glove a little bit back to when Team Vantage came here as well. So right around 2012, 10 years ago. I'm not gonna say our current policy is bad. I mean, our current policy is there. We're meeting the minimum requirements. I think it can be better. I think it can be more defined and have a little bit better package that we can bring to the table.
And what was your last slide in this presentation?
The last slide.
Yeah, so project types, like how do we, is that what you're talking about, doing a workshop to kind of quantify what are those workshops we want to include in this policy?
I think it's sort of, when I talk project types, I think it's sort of, I really had a hard time trying to figure out how do I classify this, because it's really sort of objectives, like, what are the goals? What are we trying to, like, what type of development are we trying to bring in? Are we focused more on, bringing in high-tech manufacturing? Or are we trying to bring more jobs to the city? Are we trying to bring, those type of conversations and having some of those crafted into something that's similar to what you see here in Cottage Groves. I mean, it's just making sure that this language here, that if we're looking at what's the initial, can they get their foot through the initial part of the policy, this is sort of that first stopgap of saying, making sure our goals are in alignment. So I guess, but it was hard for me to really try to quantify that in a few sentences. So that's why I said project types.
Chris, go ahead.
Can maybe take a shot at that one. So for example, if a company approached you and said, I want to buy 10 acres of the 123 acres that you've got available in the headwaters, and I want to put a 40,000 square foot warehouse there and fill it full of tires, and I'm going to have 5 people in there moving tires at $10 an hour, what can I get for incentives? So you might want to think through that a little bit and say, well, first of all, we'd expect that the jobs would be, $25 an hour for us to even consider it. So something along those lines. So in your policy, you might have specific language that calls out a certain job wage level to even start the discussion. You might have something along the lines of, we're not interested in warehouse space, we'd like high-tech manufacturing, or something along those lines. And so those are the types of things that Dan would want to bring back for your consideration.
And do all of those specifics go into the actual policy? Right?
Yes, you'll see on some of the policies, like for wage, for example, instead of just saying, because obviously, with inflation and with, cost of living increases, et cetera, wages can, you might need to adjust those more frequently. So what they may say is minimum 1.5 times minimum wage. So as minimum wage adjusts,
Right.
we're already at that same point, so you have some level of that, that's already built in the policy to prevent, like Chris said, you may not want to incentivize minimum wage jobs. You may want to bring higher paying jobs in and then set what's your level that you want. That language would go into the policy.
Yeah, because if you had set a wage, a number, you'd be working on it every 6 months, right? Every year, Oh.
Or, the other point too, 10 years ago, a decent wage there compared to now is going to be way out of whack. So that's why you keep those numbers so automatic, sort of self-adjust. You don't have to go through every time and make those changes.
a lot to think about. So we'll be relying on you, Dan.
And like I said, I kind of wanted just to give the 101, just to give that foundational knowledge, because this is going to there's going to be a lot of, kind of forward thinking as to what we want Forest Lake to be. I mean, like I said, we're not making decisions tonight. This is more foundational. So when we go to the next conversation, we can kind of rely back on this knowledge.
And more of those decisions would be made at a joint meeting?
Correct. Yeah, because you want to make sure everybody's sort of in alignment, that we're all basically, as the Gophers coach says, rowing the same direction. You don't want boards going like this and you just sort of sit there. You want to make sure everything's in alignment, going in the right direction on that.
Well, thanks, Dan. Anybody else have any more comments or questions? I guess we'll move on then. We're on to city updates, and I think what we'll do is we'll start with Ryan. Yeah. Don't mind?
Sure, I just wanted to make you guys aware of something that Washington County is leading. It kind of relates obviously into our downtown plan. So Washington County has issued a request for proposals for a visioning and jurisdictional transfer study of Trunk Highway 61 in the cities of Hugo and Forest Lake. The jurisdictional transfer components for the extents of the 61 through Washington County will be visionary components within the city of Hugo, and then up in the extents of Forest Lake will be the jurisdictional transfer. So what we mean by that is there's the potential of the road authority going from the state of Minnesota to Washington County. When you make that transition, obviously there's some relaxation in design standards, road standards. The state highway has higher standards than what the county would, and then, just as if it then ever got back all the way down to the city, we have lower road standards, than moving forward. So that's what that plan is all going to entail. It's got a budget of $250,000. $200,000 is coming from Washington County, $50,000 from the city of Hugo. Long story short, it's anticipated the county will award the contract to a consultant May 10th. So upon that, I don't know what the schedule of the work is at this point, but that's kind of what we're leading up to. But obviously that will play into a lot of things with your already Trunk Highway 61 water and quality plan that you guys have, if you're not aware of that, but then also the downtown plan study that's moving forward too. So I just wanted you aware of that. Obviously there'll be some public engagement in this process, so something to keep your ears peeled to, and we'll continue to update you guys as we move forward.
So that would be a positive thing for our downtown project.
Brad, I hate to put you on the spot, but do you want to add to that at all? Friend Muron, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan is correct on that, and we're excited. And we've got a lot of examples actually in the recent years of transfer of jurisdictional authority. County or State Highway 5 going into Lake Elmo is a good example. And in that particular case, there was a significant amount of cash that the county received as part of that jurisdictional transfer. And there was a lot of improvements done within the downtown area of Lake Elmo, and with respect to turn lane safety projects and that type of thing. 244 over in Matamidi is another example of a turn back, and the county again is doing improvements to that road to benefit the community there. So I think, as Ryan indicated, we've got more flexibility at the county. It's not that our standards are necessarily less, but I think we've got more flexibility, and I like to think that we work better with the communities that we serve. So I think there's some opportunities. We're actually working with Delwood right now on a potential turnback of Highway 96 that would potentially come back to the county. And so we've got some opportunities to work there and to address some trail needs that the Links Trail in that particular area has been seeking. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think this is a very unique opportunity, and I think it will enhance your downtown plan. I can tell you after, was it last week's meeting that I attended, your joint meeting, I came back to our county staff and talked about the need for maybe more flexibility along the regional trail, the Hardwood Creek Regional Trail, to accommodate some of the the work that you would like to do in Forest Lake. So I think there's some opportunities, and that's more under the Washington County Regional Rail Authority, which really is a board of the county board that controls that right of way. But I think we have opportunity to be a little more flexible in some of the restrictions that exist there as well. So we're looking forward to the opportunity to work with you, opportunity to plan for this. And obviously the county's made a significant financial commitment to do this planning in advance. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. You know, these things oftentimes take years to accomplish, but there's been talk about this for a long, long time and very little action. And I think what we're looking at now is at least some planning to create the opportunity for action.
Would you explain what that means financially, going from the state to the county, the turn back?
So, you know, the state has had Highway 61 in a holding pattern for a lot of years. A maintenance highway is what it's called. And the turn back would allow us to consider types of improvements that may be necessary within a community. And those are negotiated agreements. And so personnel from the state would sit down with our county staff and with your input and the plans that we've developed, negotiate that turn back. And it may involve some cash to do certain improvements that likely are necessary by the state at any rate. And so, you know, it's a negotiation, quite frankly. And we're fortunate in many ways over the years. We have local community engineers and staff and county engineers and staff that are now integrated into the state system as well. So we have, I think, over the years built up a level of trust, an ability to negotiate with people because, you know, they're people we know and we've worked with. It's interesting, you know, as you look at even some of the state projects that are going on, and Highway 36 and Manning, that interchange and that improvement that's going on, even though that's a state highway, Washington County is leading that project. Our next goal is to do improvements at Highway 36 and Lake Elmo Avenue, which is a County Road 17. And the county is looking at leading that project as well. So we've got a good relationship with the state. I think they recognize that. And they recognize, I think in many cases, the fact that the county on many of these roads can serve the needs of the communities better. And they do good work. I mean, MnDOT is good to work with. The meetings that we have, they attend those meetings, their staff attend those meetings. You know, I think we have maybe a greater ability to work with the communities a little more closely, in some cases to secure federal funding that's necessary for some of these projects as well.
Yeah, thanks for the additional update, Fran. Appreciate it. Patrick, do you have anything for us tonight?
Well, you mentioned the search for a community development director, and it's still ongoing. We went out a second time. We believe we have 4 candidates that we may be interviewing and seeing how that goes. We'll see how that goes. 4 candidates are not a lot. Again, the pool is pretty thin like it has been the first time, so we will probably set up interviews for those and see where we go and see if we find a good candidate. What we won't do is hire a candidate that we don't like, or just because we have to hire somebody. We want to make sure we find somebody good that can serve the public as best as they can. So we'll see.
Thanks, Patrick. Karen, do you have anything for us tonight?
Thank you, Commissioner Husnick. I don't have any updates.
Okay, thank you. Dan, did you want to, you had plenty tonight. Do you have any more for us, or?
I have nothing. Well, the only thing I have is I will reach out to Bruce, the downtown planner, this week and get an update on where we are with the plan and what the next steps are. I was out of the office next week, so I'm playing a little bit of catch up right now, but I'll get that back on track this week.
All right, thank you. Chris? Chris, you're up next with the Washington County update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Just a couple of quicks. Tomorrow, I'll be attending a county board workshop to talk about expanding our business assistance to small businesses throughout the county. And we know that there are still a number of businesses that are struggling to recover from the pandemic. And we also know that there are some smaller to medium-sized businesses that might be a little bit too big for the Open to Business program, but still need some help to get to that next level. And so we're going to be asking the county board for consideration to develop and design a new program here in the county that will be, we're calling it the Elevator What's Next CEO program for small businesses here to provide additional assistance that we don't currently offer through the Open to Business program, just to help those businesses that are either falling through the cracks or still struggling to grow as a result of the pandemic. And then one more quick thing is we have set the 5th annual East Metro Development Summit date. This year it's going to be May 12th over in Golden Valley, and Dan's agreed to present on your downtown redevelopment efforts and planning at the as a panelist at the event that's coming up on May 12th. So we're excited about that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions for Chris? Go
So
ahead.
these new programs that you're talking about, might they include businesses that have started post-pandemic?
Yes,
that are
yeah, for sure.
struggling still because of it?
Yeah, so those businesses that may have been closed for a period of time and maybe have gone through their cash, just keep the lights on while they were closed, and now they still want to grow and have the ability to grow, but just have no resources to do that. So we're trying to, so post-pandemic going forward, how do you help those businesses that survive that are still willing and have the aptitude and ability to grow, but just can't quite get to that starting line? So yes. Yep, and that'll be a big focus of this, is to help those, I'll call them maybe stage 2 companies that are no longer startups, but they're at that level where they're ready to grow the business, but maybe still working in that business and want the business to really start working for them. So.
Well, thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Other questions?
My other question is, we need to take a look at our banners that are on our posts and either replace them or take some of them down. So by the shake of Dan's head, I can tell that someone else has mentioned that.
Actually, I noticed one the other day coming in that actually had fallen off, and I was like, I gotta add it to my list, but I forgot to do it, so it's on my list now.
As long as we're talking nickel and dime stuff. What about that Clear Lake sign that I've been asking for a couple of years? So when people drive along the freeway, they don't think Clear Lake is Forest Lake. Can't we just have a sign out there side of the frontage road, lake? So much to ask.
Has that been discussed? I can't remember. Yes, right, they don't post.
Put it on the state highway.
That frontage road. There's room.
There's a tree.
I'd say there's
White
room.
marker that you could use?
No, it's amazing how many people, when you're in a group of people, think that's Forest Lake. And we're trying to promote downtown.
Nail it to the tree there or something. There's a couple trees around the lake there.
Make my own little handwritten sign, Clear Lake, yeah.
So another question, our next step with the downtown plan is, so, the next step?
Yeah, I believe, and I'll circle back with Bruce to confirm dates and times and everything, but I know based on the last meeting, that was the meeting where he set the directives and got all the feedback on, I think, the 11 directives that were included in the plan. And then now they're working on taking those directives and actually developing the action steps, more of the executables, like the actual projects that we would need to accomplish that directive. So there is going to be another opportunity for public feedback on those action steps prior to it getting approved. So we're on the home stretch, but a lot of information is going to be coming out on that plan. And
We don't have dates yet.
I don't have dates yet. Like I said, I was out of the office last week, so I did not have a chance to confirm with Bruce.
Okay. Everybody okay? The next item on our agenda is the Forest Lake Area Chamber of Commerce. Does anybody have any comments about that?
Yeah, I can update you on that. The annual, second annual Spring Fling egg sighting, Spring Fling will be April 6th to 16th. It's for Shop Local. And the local vendors, retailers will be having specials and money and opportunities. And then the biggest event for the chamber for the year is going to be the golf tournament still on July 25th.
Well, thank you very much for that update. Last thing on our agenda is if anybody would consider a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.